Copyright in these lectures is either owned by the ANU or a third party who has licensed the ANU to use it. Students may use the recording for personal study only. No lecture may be communicated online, copied or shared without the prior permission of the ANU.
Those type of points. So please be careful for the next submission. Whenever you say something about, it is they don't take into account the industry differences. For example, like how capital structure is gonna be different between technology or retail industry. That's totally not correct. Because I think they are co-authors. The journals in the top finance journal. Definitely, they cannot. Disregard, something very obvious like that, So if they control for firm fixed effect, basically they compare the same firm. It's just like time variation during the firm life cycle. You see what I mean? So, and another thing is that, for example, like in the urban vibrancy paper, they only have firm fixed effect, and I think they have size or something. You may say that you think that they need to control for market to book ratio because, for example, you may say, firm with high market to book ratio is going to grow faster, and that is the reason why the investment rates can be higher, So something like that, then that's okay, if they don't control for this, because firm fixed effect is something fixed over time, right? So they compare the same firm, but with time variation during their life cycle. So, but I mean, during their life cycle, their size may change, significantly, So when putting the firm fixed effects doesn't mean that you control for size properly, So if you think that the effect in interest is very important, very different among firm size, then you may argue that they need to control additionally for size, So then that's okay, So you can get credit for this, But if you're just saying like, they don't consider the industry classification and stuff like that, then, it's actually not really a point, for your comment. Another common mistake is the year fixed effect. So for example, you say, they don't consider inflation rate. They don't consider the interest change, the change in the interest rate or monetary policy and stuff like that. So be careful with those of the comments. You have to look at the table, and if they put the year fixed effect, then that means like they compare every firm in the same year. So they don't compare across years, So as I explained to you earlier, the fixed effect is something like sorting the sample, it's like pooling together, So you're not pooled together, but you sort by categories. So by doing year fixed effect, basically you compare every firm in the same year, and if you compare in the same year, the inflation rate doesn't matter anymore, right? So inflation rate basically is going to be captured by the year fixed effect, because it's the same for every firm in the year, right? So in any year, for every firm, they suffer the same inflation rate. You see what I meant? So basically, when they do the year fixed effect, then they basically properly control for any inflation rate or monetary policy and stuff like that, or macroeconomic conditions. So I do see a lot of comments that, that you explain quite a lengthy paragraph, but you cannot get three points for that. Comment. So and to be safe, in order to get full credit, I strongly suggest you to raise more than 3 points. So to get a 10. So I'm okay to give you a 10. It's just like if you show me sufficient enough, For example, if you raise 3 points and 1 point is about firm fixed effect, that it's been captured in firm fixed effect, another point is about year fixed effect, then basically you got only if the rest is 3 plus formality is 1, then you got 4 out of 10. So it's kind of risky that if you just limit to raise in the paper critics only 3 points, then you know, you may get something like 6 or 7, you know. 6 or 7, I'm actually very lenient already, you know. If I kind of strict, you're gonna be, you know, you're gonna get much less, you know, than that. Okay, let me see, what other common mistake? Yeah, some other common mistake is like too generic mistake. For example, you say, the paper talking about this, and you know, we cannot infer anything about causality. Okay, then those type of points cannot really get any credit. You know, because it's, you know, any type of question is very likely that endogenous, you know, very likely that you only show correlation, and the papers have to show causality, right? So the tables give you the correlation, and then you have to do a lot of more tests to prove the causality. And then you need to read the paper and whether you're going to be convinced, you know, the way that they prove the causality. So you cannot throw in a comment saying that, you know, this paper talking about A and B, and you don't think that it is about causality, you know. So those type of things not going to get any point, you know. So too generic comments not going to get any point, okay? Or something like, if you say that the CDS may not be a good proxy for financial distress, I recommend the authors consider some other factors, and that's it, period, you know. Then what do you mean by other factors, you know? So give me some examples, you know. So if you extend your analysis, elaborate your analysis, you know, you're going to get more points. But please don't stop at, you know, the CDS is not really a good proxy for financial distress, and I think that they should do something else, and then period, you know. Then you know, it's not sufficient, you know. So yeah, so I think like try to avoid too generic one, and then try to elaborate as well. You know, just a few sentences elaborate your thought. You know, you might get full credit for this. And then try to avoid something about, you know, for someone who are late, about firm fixed effect. You know, so if you're saying that, you know, they don't consider the type of firms or the type of industry, then be careful when you look at the reaction, you know, whether they do control for firm fixed effect or not. Be careful saying something about, you know, inflation rate, macroeconomic condition. Very few papers, they actually miss out those controls, you know. So I would think the majority of the paper they control for firm fixed effect or year fixed effect, or if not firm fixed effect, they're going to do the industry fixed effect. Okay, so the industry fixed effect, basically they sort by industry, right? So they compare every firm in the same industry. So by doing that, they compare Apple with Apple, right? So they're not talking about Google and Aldi, right? Or Woolworths or Kohl's, you know. So they're not talking about the very striking difference between these two type of firms. You know, they're talking about firms in the same industry. So for those type of comments, you know, definitely you're not going to get full credit, you know. So I just want to explain to you guys, just in case you cannot get a 10 or a 9, I mean, like, then you think that maybe your comment, you know, maybe fall into those type of you know, kind of misunderstanding or, you know, mistake that I just try to explain, you know. Okay, what else? Yes, and I think like I got something even a group saying like, so we got a paper about CDS, and then we talk about the indirect cost, right? So the paper is about indirect cost of bankruptcy, and then, you know, the group's just saying like indirect cost of production, you know, something like that, you know. So that's just saying something that you haven't read the paper, right? So you just stop maybe at the abstract or the title, right? And then you think that the author is talking about the indirect cost of production, you know. But instead, they're talking about indirect cost of bankruptcy, you know. So yeah, so try to be careful with those type of mistakes. Okay, so I really hope the next, I think like this time, I think like we got many good, you know, comments, especially from the presentation as well, and the discussion group, so I'm very happy with that. What I discussing now is just try to improve, So hopefully we're gonna get more and more like 9, 10, or 8, for your weekly critics, But I think the performance, I think, is pretty good. So it's not really bad. And of course, I mean, in many cases, I'm also trying to be lenient. I just try to recognize your time, right? You actually spend some time, and this is more like a weekly assignment. So I know that it's very time consuming to expect too much. So that is why I also consider that when I grade the critics. Okay, so as I said to you earlier, if you say something like this, and definitely it's very clear that the paper already controlled for this, you definitely get a 0. But most of the time, I don't give you 0. It's just like very totally wrong, flatly wrong, that I give a 0. Otherwise, I always give something to you guys. Okay, so the topic today, I think for this week, we're gonna talk about the payout policy. Okay, so we're gonna learn a different type of ways that firms can distribute back their returns, right? So you can, I think the very common one is the dividend, but I mean, this, in addition to that, they also can do something about what? I mean, in addition to dividend, how can they distribute the money back? Repurchase, right? So yeah, we also talk about repurchase as well. Okay, so I forgot one thing about a data project. Do you guys have any other question at all? Yeah?
Questions whether, I mean, in this case, we can only consider about one independent variable in each regression model, right? But whether we could use like more durable regression model to consider several independent variables?
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to do that. Yeah. So I think like the univariate analysis is just some kind of a very preliminary analysis, So then I, as I said to you earlier, in order to get full credit, you need to do multivariate regression. Yeah. So you have to. So it's just a little exercise to do with the data, So for the univariate analysis, you can do something about a figure. Figure is actually a univariate analysis, right? Because you only consider two variables together, right? So I call this one is a univariate analysis, And yeah.
So what do you mean about one independent variable and one dependent variable, but with many different control variables?
Yeah.
So that's a multi.
Yeah.
And also I have another question about the data set you uploaded, the SIC code. I realized that some columns are missing.
Yeah. I think they always got missing. So you just treat it as missing.
But while trying to like sort it by industry, like some of these are missing and I cannot put it into the industry, different industry.
So I don't know which software do you use, but I think like if you use Stata, and if they are missing, they're just gonna exclude those in the regression, so they just exclude that out of the regression. Yeah, I think it's missing, and some kind of even data errors always, exists in every type of data set. So we cannot really do anything much about it, missing data. Yeah. I think except for some papers that they're interested in industry classification, they may do some hand collecting to just modify the data set. But I think the majority, I think they just use them as they are. Yeah. And I think I gave you the historical SIC as well, because I think some data sets, they just give you the most current SIC, and they don't give you the historical. So what does that mean? That means like over the life cycle of a company, they may change the industry classification, right? So I think some data set, they just don't track those changes in the industry classification. Yeah.
So do we need to explain how we clean the data, like how we?
Probably no. I don't think that you got enough work. I think you may, of course, no. I think like you don't explain the coding, the step, but I think like if you're saying that you're gonna exclude this, exclude that, then you need to say something. You know, for example, I think, I don't know if you read the paper, what kind of the very common exclusion? Yeah, financial firms, you know, so something like that, you know, so definitely show, you know, if you do that, then talk about that in your report, okay? Yeah, so it's just to show that, you know, you recognize this, you know, so definitely you're going to get credit for those type of things, okay, yeah.
So when you do year fixed effect,
Yeah.
is that equivalent to adding dummy variables for each year?
Yeah.
Model?
Yeah, exactly. But I think like if you do starter, there's gonna be a code. They say like the little I dot and then the F year. So that's they taking care of. So they gonna create. So they don't create in the data set. So they is gonna, you know. So they do it themselves, you know. But if you do it manually, then you have to create. Yeah, you have to create. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So for example, yeah, exactly. So if you got like 10 years, there's going to be 10 dummy variables in there. Yeah, so that is why if you include the fixed fact, it actually reduces the degree of freedom a lot, right? So normally, they only use the fixed fact when you got a very large panel data set, you know. So just to compensate the loss of freedom, you know, when you introduce a lot of indicators. Yeah, similar like that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, if you use R, definitely, probably you have to manually, right, create that. But I think if you use Stata, there's you know, a code, very easy code that you can. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I think like they normally. I think like there are a variety. I think one way is like you can do like a rack, you know. This is a y variable, x variable, and then you're gonna say absorb, let's say firm fixed fact, you know. So normally I code ID, you know. Or so this is just one fixed fact. But if you want firm fixed fact and year fixed fact, then you can do either way. I think you can do arrac, y, x, I dot, f, year or year. Normally I use F year, that means like fiscal year, you know. So it's totally different with calendar year, right? Because you know that most of the companies in Australia, they got the fiscal year end of June, right? But I think some other firms may have the fiscal year end of December. So calendar year and fiscal year, they are different, okay? So you got Y dot F year and then Y dot ID. But I think like, oh, no, sorry. And then you do absorb ID, you know. So then basically you got two fixed fact. So year fixed fact and firm fixed fact. Another way that you can do is like, you can do high definition FE. So this is a regression. HD means high definition. That means like very high level of fixed fact. High definition fixed fact. And then you got Y, and then you got X, and then you got absorb. So this coding gives you to put many fixed fact into here. You know? And then you may cluster as well. VCE, I think. So if you want to cluster by industry, then let's say industry. So this is VCE, I think. I forgot about this. Please check. But I think it's, and then you say cluster. Industry. Something like that. You know? So one way to just create different columns, right? Because it's just to show your work, right? Then maybe you can do the first columns you control for firm fixed fact, the second columns you control for year fixed fact. It's similar like in the table or paper that you read, right? Then the third columns you combine them all, and then you may do something experiment with the clustering as well, right? So the clustering basically is a more robust test, okay? So it's kind of the test. I think it's much easier, and I think Stata, you can access Stata in any library, right? Computer. I think it should be installed in the library computer. So I'm not familiar with R. But it's up to you. I mean, if you use R, then probably you need more work with the fixed effect. Yeah. Yeah, and I think like you don't need to put any command that you use for your software, but just show your work, you know, because this any thought that you have made, that means like it's take your time, right? So it's worth a credit, you know. So I think it's kind of not a trick, but it's kind of a way for you to show your work, you know, so then to get a high credit for your project. Okay, so. Okay. Yeah, so do you have any other question regarding the project? Yeah, I think XT-RAG is okay too. I think there's some marginal difference between the XT-RAG, but I think because for your purpose of the master, maybe you don't need to pay attention too much. Yeah, I think you can use XT-RAG as well. I think this one is gonna be the fastest one, you know, because you're gonna see if you put a firm fixed effect, you know, any type of fixed effect is slow down a lot, you know. So one regression may take a few minutes to run, you know. So it's not gonna show up the result right away, you know. So so I think this one is the most efficient one. So the XT-RAG also work, but it's very slow, you know. So even with one fixed effect, it can take, like, you know, let's say 2 or 3 minutes. And if you got two fixed effects like this, it's going to take like 10 minutes, you know. So I think like this type of code is speed up. You know, it's just like increase, I think, the computation capability. So yeah, it's going to much faster. So I normally use this instead of the above. Okay. Yeah. So let's start our lesson today about the payout. So as you said earlier, you know, like there are two types of payout that we you know, we know that. So the first one is dividend, and the second one is share repurchase. So why firms they pay dividend? You know, so I think it's not very, you know, like not really something really new, right? So we understand that firm pays dividend because of, you know, they got a lot of free cash flow, right? And another benefit of dividend is what? So they distribute back the free cash flow, but I think any other benefit of that regarding the agency cost? Yeah, exactly. So they cannot misuse the cash, right? So they cannot misuse the cash. So we learn about the free cash flow hypothesis, right? So when firms got a lot of cash, they're gonna misuse, they're gonna abuse, right? So then, you know, by distributing back the cash flow, it's gonna, you know, reduce the tendency of managerial perks. Okay? And it's reduced the potential of overinvestment by the management as well. And I don't know whether you remember the capital structure, that we understand that it depending on the growth opportunity. So there is no right or wrong answer for the dividend effect, right? So for example, on stock price, you know, so if you are an investor, you're gonna buy dividend before or after the stock, the dividend announcement. If you are an investor, and you're interested in a certain stock, then you're going to buy it before or after the dividend. What do you think? Before? Does it matter? Okay, very good. So it's you actually, maybe you got an A for MN. I mean, for the yeah. So I think like in theory it doesn't matter. Yeah, you are right. In theory it doesn't matter, but in reality it may matter. And in which case matter, whether it should be negative or positive related. So what do you think? So if it's just like, let's pick up an example, you know, so I'm interested in buying stock, and this stock stock pay dividends regularly, you know, and I know that this is the end of the year they're going to announce dividend. So what do you think about whether you're going to buy it before or you're going to buy it after? After. Why? Yeah.
But if they are not like under this kind of, I mean, constraint, they can buy it before the dividend payout. But like for other countries, people are not under this kind of constraint. They prefer to buy it after the payout.
Yeah, very good. So the first consideration is tax, right? So there is no yes or no answer, you know. So the first consideration is tax. So you're gonna see whether in your country, the tax on dividend income and the tax on what? You compare with the tax on what? Capital gains, right? So you're gonna compare the dividend on tax on dividend or tax on capital gains, right? So in some cases, the tax on capital gain is higher than the tax on dividend. Then you may not want dividend at all, you know, or vice versa. So the first thing is a tax consideration. What else? What else you're gonna take into account whether you're gonna buy before or after? Transaction cost? Yeah, maybe. I think like, but if the transaction cost is very transparent, then it can factor to the price, you know. Yeah, but I agree, you know. So if for some reason the transaction cost is too high, right? But let me see. Because I think like, for example, if you buy a stock after the dividend and before the dividend, then I think it shouldn't matter much, right? It may matter because of the amount change, and I think the dividend is going to be credited to your account automatically, so you don't really need to do any extra document. But I think it can, you know. But I think it may have minimal effect, right? Okay, so what else? So from your foundation, corporate finance foundation, you remember what are the factors that we need to think? So whether I should buy it before or should buy it after. Which type of firm that I'm more likely to earn returns, right? By buying before or after the dividend announcement. Forgot. Any other? Sorry? Yeah, I agree. But how do you know? What do you think that whether it's going to increase? So let's say, let's talk about this. You know, so for example, if before dividend, right? So before dividend, so let's say the price is 10 per share, right? And then after dividend, right? So let's say if I got a dividend of $1, right? 10%, let's say like this, $1 dividend. Then I'm not really sure about this, right? So what would be the new price? 9, right? So the new price in theory would be 9. But you don't know, you know. So in reality, it may not be 9. So how can you know that it would be above 9 or below 9, right? So in which case I'm gonna be better buy before, or in which case I'm gonna better buy after, right? So there is a trading strategy for this. So what do you think in this case? So you're gonna consider the first thing is tax, right? So if the tax on capital gain and tax on dividend, they are different, then this is no longer a 9, right? This is gonna be slightly different. And then you're gonna know, like, in which case it's gonna be better to buy before or after. So which are the factors that you should consider? Sorry? The borrowing cost. Okay, so you mean like, Yeah, I think it may affect. So the borrowing cost. So assume that this is a very short period of time, right? Then of course, if I buy 10, then I need to borrow at 10, right? But if I buy after, I'm only need a 9, right? But let's say if the period of time is very short, right? Then the borrowing cost may have an effect, but it's not really huge. What other things? So if a firm announce a dividend, right? So what are the factors that you need to think about? So you're gonna want to see that whether the dividend announcement is appropriate or is something common for this type of business, right? You know, so then you can predict the stock price reaction, right? For example, in some cases, the dividend announcement can generate a negative returns. Okay, in which case gonna generate a negative returns?
Like the company maybe they should have a lot of project to invest.
Yeah.
But right now they pay the dividend. It's kind of like they have no some really good investment.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so then I think like we're gonna learn all of the factors that we consider, you know, we learn in class. Then we know that more likely that the stock market is gonna react negatively or positively. Okay, so a lot of cases like dividend may trigger a negative announcement returns, and in some cases it can be positive announcement returns. You know, so if it's a negative announcement return, then you better to buy before, right? But if it's a positive announcement return, then you're gonna buy after. You know, so it's gonna be much better than this. So for example, like look at this. So the first theory that we talk about is signaling firm quality. So in some cases, if the dividend announcement signal the quality of the firm, that for example, like before they consistently pay, let's say 80 cents per share, and now they're very confident and they distribute $1 per share, then it's actually a positive signal. So in this case, maybe it's going to be much better to get the dividend, to keep the stock, right, and get the dividend. And the other one, let's say, something about, so the consistent dividend policy can help to signal firms' quality. So in this case, I think it's especially important for firms that are opaque, right? Or it is harder for outsiders to access or to evaluate the quality of asset. For example, like pharmaceutical firms, so those type of firms very less likely that they pay dividend, But if they pay dividend, then it actually shows something that they kind of have a very reliable, right, stream of cash flow in the future. Okay, so that's probably the reason why. And another theory that we learn is about Cartering theory, So the Cartering theory, what does it say? So it says that the managers may cater the investor demand and firms pay dividend to satisfy the preference of their clientele. Okay? So it's totally depending on the investor preference. So if you understand that retired people, right, very interested in a regular dividend stream, right, then the increase in the dividend announcement may be a very good signal for those type of firms. Okay? But I think for technology firm or something like that, maybe the dividend announcement may generate some negative reaction as well. So we have to consider the investor type, of these firms. The other one is the theory that we learn about bird in the hand. So it's like bird in your hand is always better than bird, flying somewhere else, okay? So in this case, the dividend considered as less risky than a potential future capital gains, But this time it only matters for, I think, mature type of firms, right? So for very high growth firms, I mean, this type of theory may not matter at all, okay? So again, tax, I think as you said earlier. So the tax is very important. So I think like on Friday, I'm going to discuss the paper about the tax theory, So in the US, I think U.S. is kind of a very special country that they actually encourage entrepreneurship type of thinking, like mentality, you know. And the way that they try to encourage entrepreneurship is that they got a very, I think like a preferential tax, that means concession tax, you know, when you invest in the stock market. I mean, like you're gonna have a very low tax rate on capital gains. So that is the reason why, I don't know whether you remember, but one time the Warren Buffett, I think the billionaire, the most richest, I think used to be richest man in the world, he said that he paid a tax rate is lower than the median tax rate that American people are paying. So that's really ridiculous, right? Because I think for us, we're thinking that, you know, with a huge amount of income or earnings every year, you know, his tax rate should be much higher than the median tax rate that people are paying. But he said that, you know, he pay actually the lower tax rate than the normal people. You know, so the reason is because the government, the U.S. government, really encourage the entrepreneurship activities, you know, and they encourage the stock market participation, and that is why if you gain from the capital gain, you know, if you got income from the capital gains, you actually got a very low tax rate compared to the salary that you know, receive every year or every month, you know. So if it's the case, the tax is really important. It's a very important factor. And I think that paper, they document and evidence that there was a time in the U.S. that they increased or decreased the tax on dividend. You know, so before the tax on dividend and tax capital gain may be different, you know, and then at one time, maybe similar, but at one time they change. And, you know, they exploit that event. And, you know, and they investigate or they evaluate the impact of tax, you know, on the dividend announcement. Okay, so tax is very critical. I'm not sure about China, whether you're familiar, but the tax rates that if you get income from capital gain, then how much? You know, I think it can be low as like 15-20% compared to the marginal tax rate that, you know, you can easily get like 30% tax rate, you know, so. You know, so for example here, if there is a policy, right, from the government that they reduce the tax on capital gains, so what does that mean? That means they discourage firms to pay dividend, right? Right? Because they saying that, you know, the investors are gonna want lower tax, right? And they want capital gain, they don't want dividend because the tax on dividend would be higher, you know. So they're willing to let the company keep the money, right, and then reinvest. And when they do the reinvestment, then stock price is gonna, you know, it's gonna rise, right? And then they're gonna get from the capital gain instead from the dividend. So that is why the differential, you know, effect of tax is very important, you know. So we need to consider the differential effect between tax capital gain and you know, tax on dividend. Okay. So I think this is kind of the literature, you know. So they show some evidence saying that, you know, when the U.S. government increased the taxation of the dividend, then they observe a large surge in the use of stock repurchase around the world, you know. So when the government increased the tax on dividend, then they understand that their investors are going to pay more tax, and they keep the money back, you know, and it's going to do in the case of share repurchase. So what does that mean? So if they do the share repurchase, then the income of the investor is going to become what? Become capital gains, right? Because you do share repurchase, you know. So if you do share repurchase, then the gain of the investor is going to be considered as capital gain rather than you distribute as a dividend. Okay? So I think in the M&M theory, they say that share repurchase and dividend doesn't matter, right? In any case, whether they distribute in any type of method, it doesn't matter the firm value. But in fact, because of differential tax, right, between capital gain and dividend, then you can see, you know, there might be some preference. So in this case, they say, you know, they're going to prefer to using stock repurchase, Okay? And then another slide fact is that the dividend is very sticky. So when firm initiate a dividend policy, right, they very likely to stick on the dividend payment. And then I think I'm gonna go over a paper, very interesting. They compare the stickiness of dividend between bank and firms. So what do you think? Who's gonna stick to the dividend payment between bank and firms? Who's more likely to uphold, right, or to value or to honor, right, their commitment in dividend? So if I split the sample into industrial firms, right, and then banks, so what do you think? So this is the paper that we're gonna talk about in a minute. But I just want to ask you to have a guess first. So if you are an investor, right, and then I invest something in stock, I invest something in firms, and then some of them got dividend payment, right, and then you hit the financial crisis, like a shock, any type of shock, negative shock, then whom do you think that you more likely still get the dividends? Banks. What do you think? Banks, okay. Very good. And why? Good guess. And this is what they show, but I mean, like, can you let me know the reason why you think that bank?
Like the bank in US, the government will be able to help.
So you think that they still honor their commitment, dividend commitment, because they got bailed out? Yeah. Okay. What are the reason? The same? What are the reason? Yeah, that is true. But I think it's not, I agree, it's not very common. I think the frequency that bailout in the banking industry is more frequent, right? Because of the systematic risk, right? It's gonna have they say it's a bank run, right? So if something wrong in one bank, it can lead to a collapse, right, of the whole system. So because of bank is structurally important, right, for the economy, then they're gonna they're more likely to get bailed out. But any other reason why you think that bank more likely? They are rich. Yeah.
Of course, they want to remain the confidence from the investor.
Yeah, so they want to maintain the confidence for the investor. But then why the industry firms, they don't care?
Well, it's not like a compulsory to pay dividends.
Yeah.
For the bank, if a larger amount of investor or they try to withdraw the money, then they will face the problem.
Okay. So yeah, I think that is partly true. I think it can be true in the sense that banks gonna concern about the investor more than the industrial firms. So I agree with that. But the reason why, I want to ask you why.
Maybe the bank wants to show investors they still have enough money to manage the liquidity risk.
Yeah. So maybe the liquidity risk is very important for banks, right, compared to the industrial firms, right? Then the perception of the investor that they got enough liquidity is important, right? That makes sense. So very good argument. Okay. So yeah, we're gonna get to that paper and see. So here they investigate the payout policy of the U.S. industrial firms and banks. And this is the gap. So you can see that during the break. So this is the fraction. So this is the fraction of firms paying dividend. Okay. So you can see that for the industrial firms, the percentage of firms paying dividend is about less than 60%, right? But the majority of banks, I would say almost 100% of banks, is gonna pay dividend. And I think that's actually makes the difference, right? The reason is the investor of banks normally looking for a very regular income stream, like pension fund, right? So retired people, so those type of investor, they demand for the regular income, and you can see that to begin with, the majority actually still, pay the dividends, and look at that. So here, 60%. Let me see. I think in a very low here, so you can see that. I don't know why this graph is actually not really a significant drop. So this is actually a significant drop, right? So this is the IT bubble, right? IT bust. And then we got the shock here, somewhere here. So I think this graph is not really, I think here they show something like we can see, maybe easier to look at this. So this is a large firm that pay dividend. Okay, so the trend here is for every firms. So we don't see much, informative fact here. But let's move to here. So for example, like this is from 1980 to 2000, and this is the industrial firms. So this is the total number of firms, and then this is the percentage of firms that having, making loss. Okay, so I think like in general, when firm making loss, they're gonna stop paying dividends. So you can see that the number of the dividend payers is like this, and then the dividend payers that reporting loss. So you can see the percentage number is very low, right? So I think it's always be lower than 15%. Okay? And then look at commercial bank. So for commercial bank, I think the title is still similar here. So let me see. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here. Okay. So I think for commercial bank, I think I should put the title here. But here, I think this is the... So this is the loss firm that pay dividend. Okay, so they're making loss and they still pay dividend. So I think the percentage here is about 30% to 40%, right? 25. But if you look at this, so this is the percentage of banks that making loss but still pay dividend. Okay, so you can see that the tendency that bank stop paying dividend even though they facing some difficulty, right, is very small. I mean, it's much smaller than the industrial firms. Okay, and then you can see here, I think they break the dividend and repurchase. Okay, so I think the black part here is a dividend and this is a repurchase. So you can see that there is a surge, right? A huge surge of share repurchase during the crisis. So what do you think? Why they more willing to do share repurchase during the crisis rather than other type of period? Sorry? Because of what? Because of undervalue. So what?
Underestimated share price.
Okay.
So for instance, it's a good time to repurchase the share price.
Okay, that can be a good argument. So you think that during this financial crisis, because of the plummet, right, of investor confidence, right? So investors become excessively pessimistic, right? And then they discount stock too much, right? And then the company think that it is a good time to repurchase the shares, So it's more about undervalue and overvalue, right? Valuation of a stock. What are the reasons? That's a good guess. So if you want to do a research, right, so you can put an argument and, do something about the relationship between overvalue and undervalue to explain the peak, right, of share repurchase. But what are the factors that we can think of? Like what? So why firm choose share repurchase instead of dividend, or vice versa? If they got, let's say, 1 billion to distribute back to the investor, what are the factors that I need to think if I'm an FC, right? If I'm a financial manager or financial director?
Tax.
Yes, tax. What else? Cost. That is true, right? Cost. Which one is costly? More costly then? Which one? I think you think dividend or share repurchase is got to be more costly. Dividend? More costly? Why? What type of cost you talking here?